This graceful dancer is slowly stepping toward the center of the stage, her beauty captivating the attention of the man sitting below. At this moment, his wife is talking endlessly to him, but he seems somewhat indifferent with a distracted look in his eyes, fixed on every move of the dancer. There appears to be something mesmerizing in her eyes that's making this man feel uneasy. When the tango performance comes to an end, the man is still entranced by the woman on stage. It turns out this is a welcome party for Hmong kindergarten. The woman on stage is also a parent of a girl studying here. The man is named Yoon Guillaume, and his wife is Han Sora, the only daughter of the largest conglomerate in South Korea. While the principal is expressing gratitude for the contributions of the couple, there's an applause that interrupts their conversation. At this moment, Rael Lam Dam steps forward with her daughter amid the crowd's excitement. She warmly thanks everyone, and Yoon Guillaume seems lost in thought while looking at Rael. It's as if every smile from her touches every nerve in him. He fell in love with her at first sight, but he probably needs to consult his wife's opinion. This makes Sora uncomfortable with the attention this woman is getting. As Rael sits down, she proactively goes to greet two other parents at the table. The two women compliment the school but comment that it's quite expensive. Only influential families can afford to send their children here. Rael modestly says, "If I don't dress up, no one will notice me. You two are naturally stunning and shine even without dressing up." The two women laugh at her remarks. At this moment, Rael's daughter asks if she can go to her friend's dollhouse. Rael points to Sora's daughter and says her daughter wants to make friends with her. Then the two women ask if she knows Sora, and Rael asks if Sora is not fond of mingling with others. The two women start gossiping, saying Sora relies on her father's status as a former prime minister and her wealthy family and doesn't care about anyone else. In her eyes, she's the only real lady. Rael then receives a call, and someone brings flowers to her. Yoon Guillaume avoids looking at her as she walks over. Although he turns his head away, he notices that Rael's bracelet has fallen. The one who brought flowers to Rael is her husband, and he's bewildered by the scene. They laugh and return to the party. Jin Wook is surprised to see Yoon Guillaume. It turns out he used to work for Kong Yul in Australia. He quickly introduces his wife and daughter to Yoon Guillaume. The woman deliberately approaches Yoon Guillaume, even touching his shoulder as she walks by, making his heart race from that moment. Rael even intentionally drops her bracelet and takes her husband to a private waiting room, eager to undress him because the tango dance has left her too excited to wait any longer. He knows they haven't seen each other for a while, and he also wants her, but can't they wait until they get home? Rael doesn't say a word but just gestures towards the room's door. Her husband finally understands, and they don't waste any more time. Yoon Guillaume brings the bracelet but Rael acts as if this scenario was already scripted. Although Yoon Guillaume is shocked, he doesn't leave immediately. Instead, he stays outside the door, witnessing the entire process. In Rael's calculations, her plan is considered half successful. 30 years ago, Rael witnessed her stepfather being beaten to death by someone. After this incident, her mother had to be hospitalized. The man behind all of this was Yoon Guillaume's father-in-law. He always wanted to take over the Lee Corporation from her father and steal the family seal. Unfortunately for him, Rael discovered his plot. When they saw Rael lying in a pool of blood, they decided to spare her. Fortunately, she encountered a kind-hearted lawyer who sent her to seek asylum in the United States. Before leaving, Rael told the lawyer that if she ever had the chance, she would repay his kindness tenfold. She believed that for debts of kindness and loyalty, luck could determine repayment. But for debts of blood, they must be paid in kind. After the Hmong welcome party, Rael took her daughter to school, but all the vehicles were stopped at the gate. Rael got off the car and wanted to see what was happening. From a distance, she saw her father's murderer right in front of her. His indifferent smile and cold eyes as he looked at her made her shudder. For him, she felt 1,000 knives piercing her heart. Her haunting past rushed back, like an autumn afternoon in Hanoi spent walking alone around West Lake. She didn't even realize her hand was gripping the railing so tightly it was bleeding. After regaining her composure, she went to the restroom to wash off the blood. Rael did her best to appear normal, but when she turned around, she accidentally bumped into Yoon Guillaume. They both greeted each other with lowered heads, and Rael forced a trembling smile. This marked the successful completion of the most important step of her plan. During the dinner party the previous night, Rael had stared at Yoon Guillaume with an intense gaze. Seeing this, he had shyly avoided her, and Yoon Guillaume had wanted to lift his glass to ease the tension but ended up accidentally spilling it on Rael. This situation seemed normal now. These two men are covered in pig's blood, and then two hungry dogs come running. Despite their owners' urging, the dogs don't attack the men. This is the entertainment of the Korean elites. The wealthy and most powerful figure in this world is none other than the President of South Korea. He holds the highest position in every field. However, his approach to the education of his grandchildren is incredibly bizarre and twisted. He often takes his granddaughter to the racecourse to train her in horseback riding. He tells her that if she can find a way to control the beast within her, she will be able to control it. I control the beast within me every morning without having to go to the horse racing track for practice. The kind-hearted child thinks that the horse would hurt if she were to hit it hard. As a result, she only lightly hits it, which infuriates her grandfather and makes the child cry. Returning 30 years in time, he wanted to acquire the Lee Corporation and its world-leading semiconductor technology. He sent someone to capture the corporation's chairman and kill him in front of Rael. However, what he didn't know was that the company's stocks had already been secretly transferred to his daughter's name. When he found out about this, he ordered his subordinates to transfer all the shares back. Since then, Rael has carried this burning arrow of vengeance to seek revenge. Today, during the kindergarten's parent-teacher meeting and the election of the Parent Association president, the teacher introduced Sora to everyone. But how could Rael let things go so easily? If she wants a fight, I'll fight her until the end. If she likes picking fights, let's pick a fight with the Green Phoenix. When the children returned for a snack, a parent accidentally pulled out a diaper from their bag. It turned out to be Sora's daughter's. So, the whole meeting room learned that Sora's daughter was still not toilet trained. The other kids started making fun of Sora's daughter. Unable to bear it any longer, she grabbed the diaper and even scratched another boy. Rael just stood by and watched the situation unfold. This was precisely what she wanted. She wanted conflicts among the Kong elites. Sora's bodyguards rushed over upon hearing that something was amiss. They demanded that the parent apologize to Sora and her daughter. But since she was also an elite, she couldn't tolerate such humiliation. Clearly, her child was the one who got hurt, so there was no reason for her to apologize first. At this point, Sora stood up and said she had another appointment, so she would discuss the matter with the parent later. Rael witnessed the success of her plan, and it made her very satisfied. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing someone in the highest position want to be at the top. Her insatiable desire would lead her to hell. This young man gave the girl a diamond necklace that was worth a fortune. No girl could refuse such a gift, not even me as a boy. Who would refuse it if given? It's not just the ladies, even us guys would gladly accept it. This is how Yoon Guillaume, the handsome and wealthy young man, expressed his love. Receiving such a precious gift from him made Rael feel very happy. It's indeed fitting for the beauty that stands out like a phoenix among the flowers. You are the most precious person in the world. Rael then served a meal to Yoon Guillaume to express her feelings. The taste of a home-cooked meal made him extremely happy. It's delicious, you make me feel, he began, but she completed his sentence with, at home. The warmest simplicity in the world. At home, the two brothers, the boy and the dancer, also looked charming. It felt like spring had come early. This dance made me dare not look directly at it. Kang's beauty added an irresistible allure to the tango. Then came a scene familiar in movies but prohibited for those under 18. The screenwriter really knows how to please the audience. But what he doesn't know is that Rael's approach to him is for a different purpose. 13 years ago, her father's company was forcibly taken from her. She endured it for 13 years, and now the time for revenge is slowly approaching. Apart from the mastermind back then, all those involved would have to face the wrath of Rael's burning arrows of vengeance, including those who betrayed her father and the company. With clear evidence before them, Jang Jin-wook still refused to admit guilt. However, their choice was futile. Rael would allow them to live a life of ease in prison, where they wouldn't have to do anything but still receive meals and water. Through a listening device, Rael overheard her enemies discussing the plan she had sent to Sora. In reality, this plan was a big bait, waiting for them to take the bait. But Rael didn't know that Eun Pyong had also started taking action. Eun Pyong was the youngest member of the National Assembly, an upright person who didn't align with any faction and championed transparency. But that didn't mean he was incapable. Yes, sir, he was certainly capable. Since he realized Rael's situation, he had secretly started helping her. Whenever he obtained valuable information, he immediately sent it to Rael. Because Rael's mother suddenly went missing from her nursing home, he advised her to endure the pain and finally told her what happened back then. Eun Pyong often visited the nursing home to see her mother after Rael went to the US, but somehow, she disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Rael deeply regretted that back then, she didn't have the capability to take her mother with her. Now, she could only hope that her mother was still alive. Seeing Rael suffer like this, Eun Pyong also felt distressed. He just wanted to protect this girl, and why was it so difficult? If love were easy, by now, I might have had a dozen wives instead of being single all year round in this autumn. Oh, mother, Eun Pyong uttered those two words. His eyes welled up, and even a tough guy like Eun Pyong couldn't help but be moved by the tears of the beautiful girl in front of him. Looking at the innocent girl from years ago who had now transformed into someone different, Rael had changed herself into an arrow of vengeance that would last a lifetime. Despite this transformation, she would always be the girl Eun Pyong was willing to sacrifice everything to protect. Rael, why are you treating me so well? Since I met you, I felt that you are the most innocent girl in the world. Even though you've changed now, I still want to protect you. Because Eun Pyong can break his own rules and limitations. This makes Han Pan very pleased, and he decides to extend an olive branch to Eun Pyong. He also praises Han Sora, his daughter, saying she's truly her father's daughter. But Eun Pyong doesn't want to shake hands with him. He is silently helping Rail collect evidence. In addition, Rail took the initiative. Eun Dam-ri couldn't attend Sora's birthday, so she brought a birthday cake as a makeup gift. However, in Han Sora's eyes, nothing subpar was acceptable. She immediately knocked the cake out of her hand. Then she came up with a cunning plan. She called two handsome men over and, in their presence, showed the check again. The challenge was simple: pursue the two girls they had just seen, and whoever succeeded would win the money. Rael, standing there, was also taken aback. Han Sora insisted that they were sisters, nearly disrupting the upcoming performance. Rael tried to endure the pain and quickly changed into her costume before stepping onto the stage. As she looked at the audience below and the wicked woman in front of her, Rael's eyes were as sharp as a knife, focusing intensely on them. Sora thought she was just performing, but at this moment, Rael really wished to send them all to a faraway paradise. She acted as if she didn't see them, hoping that if she behaved, she would be spared. However, if they dared to harm the lives of the 1%, they would face consequences. The Kong family had prospered for 4 generations, but when it came to Yoon Guillaume's generation, he decided to give up his inheritance rights. It was at this point that his father revealed the truth. He had kept it hidden because he wanted Yoon Guillaume to obediently assist his older brother. Now, with Han Sora daring to challenge the authority of her sister-in-law, it made Yoon Guillaume's father realize the danger. They knew that Han Panzu, the older brother, was trying to swallow the family fortune that had been built over the years. Adding to this, Yoon Guillaume was not a blood relative, so his father wanted him to willingly relinquish his inheritance for the greater good of the conglomerate. This angered Yoon Guillaume. After all these years, was he just a mere jester? He couldn't accept it, and he sought an opportunity to escape from home, more determined than ever. When he witnessed Rael's recent performance, he finally voiced the thoughts that had long been concealed in his heart. His face, now, appeared resolute. He had the demeanor of someone who had been mistaken for a clown but was ready to ascend the throne. If he were to truly become king, all those who had belittled him would be trampled upon. The master of the chessboard would be him, the true king. Seeing the man before her so determined, it was exactly what Rael had hoped for. She didn't need to say anything, a simple gesture would suffice. These two individuals had once tasted the bitterness of pain, and now they sailed together on a quest for revenge. However, their battle had not yet begun. They still needed to remain incognito. Rael approached Han Sora, who was smiling brightly, and told her a terrifying story: her husband might have another woman. Han Sora's reaction was immediate and intense. Yoon Guillaume also paid attention to them, realizing that Han Sora might be Han Panzu's weak point. Her volatile personality was sure to come with a high cost. The young daughter of Korea's top tycoon, Heavenly Kim, had been attending daycare but still didn't know how to use the restroom. She was constantly worried about how to wear diapers without her friends finding out. Unfortunately for her, her secret was about to be exposed. Kong Dobby. Oh my, it's Dobby's. What do I do? If I had known earlier, I would have kept it a secret. The teacher had the students and parents sit together to choose a parent association president. A parent opened a school bag, not expecting to find diapers inside. The fact that a wealthy parent's child, who was already quite grown up, still used diapers, and the bag even had a name tag, made Han Sora and her daughter extremely anxious. Such a big secret, where could they possibly hide their faces? Dobby immediately cried loudly, and this whole scene, of course, had been scripted by Rael. She had swapped the school bags of the two children so that everything could go according to plan. Han Sora could only reluctantly swallow her anger and not say anything, even though her daughter was crying loudly. She had to endure it, as her daughter's tears flowed bitterly. Seeing her friends taunting her, Dobby stepped forward and scratched the face of the boy who had led the teasing. The boy's face was scratched, and blood flowed continuously. The two children took turns using their powers. The boy's mother couldn't sit idly by either. Han Sora's secretary and bodyguards immediately rushed in. Without knowing the reason, they demanded that the boy's mother apologize immediately. Han Sora picked up everything and watched the whole process. She arranged to speak with the boy's mother later. The principal, seeing a teacher being attacked, could only stand still. No matter which lady it was, they couldn't intervene, unless they wanted to lose their job. On the way home, Dobby continued to cry loudly. Han Sora found it quite annoying, so she decided to go somewhere to ease her mind. Back at the school, the children suddenly got into a fight. Rael decided to step in as a mediator, expressing her desire to be a peacemaker. Her first move was to act as a peace ambassador and visit the Han family's house. When there are conflicts among the children, it's natural to invite their families for a discussion. This was the reason for Rael to contact Yoon Guillaume. Seeing the beautiful woman in front of him, Yoon Guillaume couldn't resist. All he could think of now was the image of Rael being intimate with her husband. The more he thought about it, the more intoxicated he became. Lust was like a bottomless pit, impossible to escape from once it took hold. Yoon Guillaume naturally wanted to get closer to this woman. Just looking at her, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Kang's daughter fights a lot. Opportunities to meet Rael Kong are frequent. Do you want Dad to agree to let you study ballet with Bo Ram? Really? Yes, Dad, I really like it. Rael brings Yoon Guillaume's daughter to his house. two children play together. Yoon Guillaume had never picked up his children from school, but this time he took the initiative to come. Unexpectedly, Rael even told him his home address. The bracelet that she dropped that night, he always carried with him. I personally helped Rael put that bracelet on. Once again, he was so enthralled that he couldn't pull out. That day, Jia Bai came to the house to play with the prison cow again. Yoon Guillaume took the initiative to pick up his little daughter. Because Jamie wanted to go to the bathroom, there was only the two of them left in the living room. This is a good opportunity to seduce men. The two began discussing music and art. Although his wife is a golden lady, she is domineering and arrogant. Rael was so beautiful and warm in front of him, Kong made him unable to hold back. In Yoon Guillaume's head, he continuously recalled the scene of this girl, hot, making others want to take her over, Rael sitting and playing a musical instrument, making him passionate. Feelings and hot atmosphere, the household suggested that the two of them have a dance. The beauty spoke up, how could she refuse? Yoon Guillaume dropped his arm and slowly placed it on Rael's small waist. And Rael's chest also slowly attacked, but defended. The two bodies lean close to each other, without gaps. This makes Yoon Guillaume extremely angry. How can he help it as a man? A seductive and enchanting tango. When two hearts beat in unison, being able to hear each other's heart is the perfect process for a fiery tango. Again and again, Yoon Guillaume's heart and soul were seduced and captivated. His heart and soul had long been taken away. Even though he had only been married for a few days, with his wife not at home, Yoon Guillaume could only drown his sorrows in alcohol. He wanted Kong, but he also wanted to claim the woman in his thoughts. Han Sora had just returned home, and Yoon Guillaume, a man known for his calm demeanor, was now filled with a burning desire. He didn't say anything but wanted to be intimate with his wife immediately, even though she had just returned home in a cheerful mood. He embraced his wife as he rushed towards her. Han Sora was overjoyed, as she had been waiting for this day for 5 years. Yoon Guillaume held his wife on the bed, but in his mind, there was the image of another woman. At this moment, Han Sora was just a substitute for someone else. However, she knew nothing and was lost in happiness. The lawyer received the news and came to find Rael. After several years, the girl from back then had now grown up and become the person he cared about the most. Rael bid farewell to the lawyer. Due to her 13-year revenge plan, her home had become a secret base. Cameras were installed throughout the house, allowing her to observe others at any time. At this moment, Rael, the beautiful but cunning woman, was patiently waiting for her prey to fall into her trap. She had never seen anyone so shamelessly cross the line, like this woman who would go to great lengths to get what she wanted. Normally, when her husband was cold and distant, she would cling to her bodyguards. But now, seeing that the bodyguards paid no attention to her, Sora was extremely unhappy. Only when the bodyguards had to admit their shortcomings was she finally satisfied. Before leaving, she made it clear that the bodyguards were not allowed to be promiscuous outside because she preferred her men to be clean and proper. Although Sora has set many strict rules, her husband doesn't comply with these rules. During his leisure time, he often reviews his video when he handed over a limited number of handbags to Rael to take to the mother of the child who was injured by their daughter. Receiving the handbag, they reluctantly accepted the apology. But Sora still kept an arrogant attitude in her heart towards Rael on that day. For Rael, as the temporary head of the Women's Peace Ambassador Association, she came up with a proposal for reconciliation. I have a way to make her lose face. Madam, would you like to know? After saying these words, Rael appeared at Sora's house. Furthermore, she brought a set of dazzling diamond jewelry. She said that she felt she had overreacted at that time because of her behavior towards the mother of the injured boy. So, she hoped that Madam could forgive her. However, Sora was not a person who was easily conciliatory. Being the daughter of a former president, she had never had to look at others with humility, even if it meant her daughter had to suffer. Kong could not bear it any longer. Seeing that Sora did not yield, Rael suggested that the position of the Women's Parent Association president should have been given to her in the first place. At present, Rael was only sitting in front of her as a temporary measure to keep the seat warm. How can I be the president? We haven't even voted yet, have we? I am the temporary president. I have already called all the other parents. Everyone agreed to let Madam be the president. Hearing this, Sora smiled arrogantly, looking quite pleased with herself. To attain a position that others cannot sit in and endure the pressure that others cannot endure is something I do not know, but this makes Sora Kong feel even more triumphant. Rael was good at observing the expressions of others as she suggested helping the madam choose her shoes. Furthermore, she personally helped her put them on, kneeling in front of her. The secretary brought a positioning map of Yoon Guillaume and presented it to her for examination. It turned out that Sora had always been monitoring her husband's every move. Whenever a woman spoke to Yoon Guillaume for more than 10 sentences, she would make sure that the woman disappeared without a trace. This was why Yoon Guillaume felt suffocated. After the secretary finished her report, Rael helped her choose her clothes and assisted Sora in putting them on. Rael deliberately mentioned how different Sora's demeanor was compared to the other wealthy women of her status, making making her seem superior to the others who were merely superficial. These words made the madam feel as radiant as the sunshine. Then she even invited Rael to her house tonight to attend the party taking place later in the evening. This party was held once a month. Many wealthy families who wanted to strengthen their relationships would attend the party. Initially, they thought Sora was just saying that. However, the result was that on that evening, Rael received a phone call inviting her to the dinner party. Upon hearing this news, her husband, Meng, was extremely delighted. As a low-ranking employee in the company, he had no right to attend such parties. If he could truly build a relationship with the director's family, it meant that his future would also take a giant leap. Thinking about this, he hurriedly knelt before his mother-in-law in gratitude. However, he could not have foreseen that Rael and his mother-in-law, after returning to their room, immediately discussed and planned for the evening party. While they were talking, some unfamiliar numbers called. Rael, upon answering the phone, discovered that it was Yoon Guillaume calling. He initially intended to explain the situation about not being able to meet and apologize to the family of the injured boy, but Rael changed the subject. Madam invited me to the dinner party. Will I be able to meet you there? I am looking forward to it. I am really looking forward to today's dinner party. This phone call helped Rael and her mother-in-law understand an important piece of information. Yoon Guillaume used an unfamiliar phone number to call, likely because he knew that his wife was monitoring him and had installed tracking devices. Therefore, he had a spare phone to use. Not long ago, one of the female subordinates attracted the attention of the chairman simply by talking to Yoon Guillaume more than a few sentences. He sent his vice chairman to deal with her. That evening, the girl met with a fatal accident right at her doorstep, a truly horrifying incident. The party began shortly thereafter, and Yoon Guillaume received news that his subordinate had been in an accident. He knew that she had died because of him, and this realization made it impossible for him to be in a good mood. At this moment, Rael approached him and gently said that their souls might be kindred spirits. When they saw each other, they couldn't help themselves and wanted to learn more about each other, to fill each other's souls. Yoon Guillaume wasn't a fool. He realized that Rael was trying to leave her mark on him. As Rael got closer, Kong began to feel the danger. He then suggested that Rael not come near him. Hearing this, Rael turned and walked away. But after just 2 steps, a wicked and eerie smile appeared on her face. She turned back to Yoon Guillaume and said, "If the director can sense danger, then I can sense a man's emotions. He claims he has no feelings for me, so why did he come to my office? Why did he invite me to the dinner party? I heard that in kindred souls, one advances and one retreats. Although we don't know if we are kindred souls, we can determine who is the one yielding." After saying these words, she turned and left for the banquet hall. At this point, the person who had killed her father and the vice chairman had arrived. The vice chairman helped the chairman eliminate a threat, and when Yoon Guillaume saw the vice chairman smile, he felt extremely uneasy. As the director, he walked up to the vice chairman, his eyes bloodshot. Luckily, Sora approached and took the vice chairman away. The vice chairman had no choice but to follow Sora to their table. However, at this moment, he noticed Rael sitting at a table with him. He gazed at her face and almost dropped his drink when he saw it. Her face looked very familiar. But when he realized that Rael was Sora's best friend, he couldn't have imagined that many years ago he had killed a man who was still alive and kicking, and that man happened to be this girl's father. Rael, meeting his gaze, felt a bit frightened, but she knew she couldn't show any signs of weakness. When she heard Sora introduce the vice chairman, she took the initiative to greet him, but after looking closely at Rael's face, the vice chairman's smile gradually faded, and he became stiff. "Is there something wrong with my eyes? I thought you were a university student." A university student. It turns out he had long forgotten what he looked like. Rael's heart, which had been pounding wildly, began to calm down, but her appearance of composure was just a facade. Her current state of mind was still in turmoil. She used the excuse of going to the restroom to relieve herself of Kang's oppressive atmosphere. After crossing the garden to the pool area, Rael picked up a small stick from the ashes and jabbed it into her thigh. She did this to restrain the urge to strangle her enemy. Then, as she was lost in thought, she noticed Yoon Guillaume standing at a distance, looking at her. She didn't know why Yoon Guillaume had followed her to this place. Upon seeing Yoon Guillaume, Rael quickly covered up the blood on her leg. When she tried to leave, Yoon Guillaume grabbed her arm. "Please, let me go," she said. After saying this, Rael rushed into the restroom, using cold water to regain her composure. As she looked at herself in the mirror, determined to seek revenge on Kong even more intensely, on the way home, her husband kept talking about the rare opportunity to attend this party. He kept mentioning the admiring looks everyone gave Rael. He couldn't stop feeling that Rael was exceptionally outstanding, saying, "I might be mediocre, but my wife is outstanding." Rael only responded with cold indifference. After returning home, she locked herself in her room. When her husband wanted to be intimate with her, she coldly refused. After hearing the rejection, the husband didn't know what to do, so he left the room and went to the guest room to sleep. Meanwhile, Rael was caught in a horrifying flashback, the day her father died, which was now playing out at the front door of their house. The man delivering the news told her that the 3 assailants responsible for her father's death were none other than her husband when he was young. Driven by a desire for revenge, Rael decided to use her own marriage as part of her plan. Rael continuously used concealer to hide the imperfections on her skin, concealing the rose garden on her back. She wanted to erase the tattoos on her body, one by one. However, she wondered if she could ever erase the image of her crush from her mind. Rael meticulously applied her makeup, wanting to showcase her best side. Her long, shiny black hair was carefully styled. Rael was confident that tonight, Yoon Guillaume would come. This time, she didn't just want Yoon Guillaume to fall into a deep abyss, she also wanted his wife, Sora, to suffer. Prior to this, she had gifted Sora 2 sets of formal wear, one in green for the Latin dance party and the other in red for Yoon Guillaume's birthday. Sora was incredibly thrilled and excited about it. She returned home and told the house staff that there was no need to inform her about the birthday arrangements. She loved surprises. She went to the study to find Yoon Guillaume deep in thought, assuming he was stressed about planning his own birthday, and reassured him that she'd be happy with any location he chose. However, the next day, when she woke up and saw that the house remained unchanged, with only a customary dinner prepared by the staff, she felt a sense of excessiveness. Discovering that Yoon Guillaume had gone to work on his birthday, despite anyone's efforts to surprise her, made her feel superfluous. She even got angrier when she saw the birthday cake and angrily knocked it over, displaying her extreme irritation. When she went to Rael's office to find someone to talk to, she was surprised to find Rael busy as well. Rael mentioned that Senator Seo had coincidentally scheduled a meeting for her on the same day as her birthday. Sora noticed the significance of Senator Seo's presence and knew how important he was. Before Rael left, she didn't forget to wish her good luck in managing Senator Seo effectively. She sat in Rael's office, waiting for Yoon Guillaume's call from dawn to dusk, until she lost all patience. Apparently today was her birthday and everything was going wrong. Even the chair bullied her and made her scream loudly, to the point that the round scarf was torn. She walked out the door without caring if she was still surprised or not, telling the secretary to arrange for her to go to the hotel that Yoon Guillaume had booked, which Yoon Guillaume thought about all day. Finally made the decision to go with Rael to choose clothes, so as not to be bothered by others and to directly turn off the phone. Life is cruel sometimes, but because if I was poor, I would go. I bought soap to bathe, but I'm not sad. Sora, after dressing beautifully, went to the hotel. Even if it was only a 1 in 10 chance, she still looked forward to it. After entering the room, she immediately flooded the room. The room was not decorated at all, and Yoon Guillaume's phone could not be called. Sora returned home and frantically destroyed the madness that was reigning within him. How deep is the love for Yoon Guillaume? Now she was crying and suffering so much. She wanted to call her father to find comfort, but instead, her father cruelly stabbed her with another fatal blow from the Infinity Sword. Blame her for being childish and not even having a birthday. Useless people off here. All she could do was call Rael. Rael understood very well why Sora was crying and pretending he didn't know anything. She loves him to death, but maybe the way I love is wrong. You can't give him freedom because of love. Sora is also a tragic woman, born into a noble tycoon family, but unable to have the love of the person she loved with all her heart. Even her father did not trust her. Rael pretended to say, "Now come to me. I know that Sora is someone who needs to have dignity even in death, and will not let her see his current shameful appearance." And of course, women hate it the most when others see their worst image when they cry, so they immediately make an appointment for the next day. Rael, after hanging up the phone, put on a white pajamas, quietly waiting for Yoon Guillaume's appearance like a queen. Who can refuse when combining pajamas with high heels? You can't refuse if you're beautiful, but if you're like me, you'll be damned if you're angry, let alone someone who's a stranger. But with Rael, you have to call him. That's baby. Today she wants to open the door to the depths of hell, dragging all her lovers into 7 loves and 6 desires, lives of desires that are difficult to reincarnate. The ruthless woman walked the corridor, targeting the man who stood aside, and struck him on the right side of his face. Not satisfied, she continued to walk along the corridor, striking him on the left side as well, for a balanced reckoning. Yoon Guillaume returned, observing the chaotic scene as if it were a burglary. There was no need to ask, he knew it was Sora's doing, a result of his absence the previous night. Have I exhausted you so much that you've gone crazy? Did you really think you could wait for me until the last minute? Yoon Guillaume inquired. Sora trembled, unable to believe the words coming from the man in front of her. In the past, even if they had disagreements, he would still provide an explanation. Now, he didn't even want to deal with it anymore. She believed that Yoon Guillaume wanted to evade his responsibilities, but she never expected him to be so serious. His secretary, Kim, intervened, saying, "I've seen your car. Come out here." Yoon Guillaume had long suspected his secretary's betrayal. Sora wanted to make excuses, but the GPS device placed in Yoon Guillaume's car was merely a sign of concern. Sora felt these things were not important. Yoon Guillaume was trying to change the subject. "I love you, and we can figure all this out," he said. "What's important, then? My birthday? Isn't that important?" Sora questioned, believing herself to be the center of everything. "On your birthday, you should be cared for and placed first," Yoon Guillaume replied, feeling that she had reached a point of no return. He turned and walked to the living room, saying that from that day on, he would share the bedroom with Sora. Sora instructed Rael to pick up their daughter and transformed herself into a pitiful figure, donning protective goggles and wielding a pickaxe, pretending to be a lumberjack saving lives. Sora's state of mind was irrational, and Rael felt the need to call Yoon Guillaume home. "What are you doing?" Yoon Guillaume asked. "Are you yelling at me?" Sora retorted, even in front of others. Rael stepped forward to calm the situation and led Sora into a room. "Do you see how he yelled at you?" Rael whispered. Rael discreetly gave Sora medication. Sora continued to vent her frustration and anger. Until now, Sora had never thought she would be the source of problems. Life was like that. If you were always right, then who would be wrong? She wondered if she had been wrong all along. She wanted to exact revenge on all those who had disrupted her birthday. "I will never forgive them. Just wait and see," she vowed. Rael donned a black suit that made her look sinister, reminiscent of my youthful charm in the schoolyard. There was no sense of contradiction. She removed her hat gracefully and then took off her coat. The two women had slender figures, much like Nok Trins, and they began to dance on stage. Rael danced based on her body's instincts. In her mind, all she could see were images of her enemies. No matter how high they climbed now, she wanted them to fall just as far. Life was arbitrary. If you lived right, you feared nothing. If you lived wrong, you feared everything. The first target on her vengeance list was Jang Jin-wook. She brought a parcel to his house and pretended to discover it at his doorstep. But after he found out the package was sent by GG Semiconductor, he became extremely alarmed. Rael knew he would surely report this incident to his superiors. In the meantime, she looked for someone to capture it as evidence. She intentionally retrieved the package that he had thrown away, pretending to have discovered his secret upon opening it. Until he explicitly explained what had happened, he shouldn't even think about touching a hair on her head. She wanted him to suffer for losing the one he loved and leave this house. After threatening him, Rael and the fake mother proceeded with their plan. The fake mother switched to a role as a teacher, taking advantage of the hidden listening device previously installed in Han Pan-ro's house. They collected dozens of audio recordings, needing only to decipher the code that Dabi had opened in the study earlier. They obtained the safe that Yoon Guillaume had placed there and then ignited social media with rumors on Fubo and Top. This would bring Han Pan-ro to court. Rael needed to go one step further to gain Sora's trust. She presented a project proposal to Sora, outlining a way to gain complete control over her brother's supermarket and how this plan would help Kong launder money for the Han Pan-ro gang. This also revealed their money laundering methods. However, Rael still needed to elevate Sora's role. Sora had to receive a key part of the job, allowing Rael to be by her side as the one who called the shots. This was the principle of giving before receiving, hence the party at the school. After the program ended, Rael quietly retreated to the backstage, leaving all the radiant glory to Sora. It was here that Sora introduced Rael to Han Pan-ro, making her a member of Sora's witness gang, the enemy who was right in front of them. She tried her best to suppress her psychological barriers. While she had improved significantly, she still involuntarily clenched her trembling fingers tightly. After the party ended, Sora happily shared with Rael that Yoon Guillaume had also arrived. To facilitate the manipulation of public opinion at the right moment, Rael, relying on her intuition as a woman, hinted to Sora that perhaps Yoon Guillaume had someone else on the outside. The husband who appeared to dote on his wife was actually an accomplice in the murder of his wife's father, and no one could have suspected it. 13 years ago, Rael's husband was one of the despicable individuals who forced her to transfer her share of the company, which is how he obtained his current position as department head. Rael orchestrated such a grand scheme, and the woman behind it all was this woman. Back then, due to the constant emotional trauma, Rael carried out increasingly extreme actions and was subsequently admitted to a psychiatric hospital. On that day, a woman entered the hospital. The child's mother had gone missing, and she would become the child's guardian in place of the parents. This woman was named Jang Moon-hee, and she had also lost her daughter due to the actions of Mr. Han. For the sake of her daughter, she understood Rael's emotional turmoil and thus devised this elaborate plan for revenge. Rael was just a pawn in this plan. On this side, lawyer Seo Eun-pyong still had doubts about Rael's identity. The person he had relied on for investigation had also found out that Rael's husband used to be an intern at her father's company. However, after her father was harmed, he suddenly appeared in his current position as department head at the company. Lawyer Seo suspected that Rael was willing to gamble her entire life for revenge. After attending the party, Rael's husband and wife returned home. The presence of Mr. Kim greatly affected their spirits. They were cautious not to upset Rael, following the #1 rule of marriage: when she doesn't want you to touch something, don't touch it. Get out. Mrs. Jang quickly learned about Rael's self-inflicted injuries and warned her that if any vulnerabilities were exposed, the plan would fail. She assured Rael that she would dismantle that household. Even if it meant going against her own child, she wouldn't easily let it slide if things went awry. The next day, Rael went to the musical instrument store she often visited and asked the owner if the bandoneon had arrived. The owner mentioned that there had been another customer recently inquiring about the bandoneon, even willing to pay a sky-high price for it. He checked his appointment book, and it turned out to be Yoon Guillaume. Rael couldn't believe that Chairman Kong also knew about this store. When Dao Thao is mentioned, Dao Thao arrives. Chairman Kong had just come to the store. The two of them exchanged a fond look, making Rail uneasy. She immediately considered leaving, but Chairman Kong followed her and asked why she wanted to buy a bandoneon. Rail explained that she liked tango, so she wanted to buy one. If she had the money, why wouldn't she buy it? She thought to herself that this guy was strange. Thanks to running into her outside, he was acting like he owned her. Chairman Kong recalled Rail's previous words about those who needed tango. Did they have some hidden meaning? There was something she was concealing, and he was determined to find out what it was. At this point, Rail had to resort to a cunning tactic to silence him, a glamorous, passionate, and sweet kiss that would leave anyone watching envious and the screenwriter rather spicy. Isn't it you who's obsessively trying to have me? Me too. Let's not think about anything else. Let's go with our instincts. Han Sora, a woman in her early 40s and the daughter of a former South Korean prime minister, was under immense pressure from her family to have a male child. Her sister-in-law added fuel to the fire, constantly taunting and humiliating her because she hadn't given birth to a son yet. Sora couldn't bear the humiliation any longer, and in a surprising turn of events, she deliberately broke a bowl in the kitchen, causing her sister-in-law to step on the broken pieces and get injured. The family rushed in upon hearing the commotion. Chairman Yoon Guillaume quickly pulled Han Sora aside, trying to console his wife and telling her to be patient, assuring her that things would get better. However, Sora was frustrated and shared with him that every time she attended family gatherings and rituals, she felt immense pressure and had to take medication just to cope. She blamed her husband for not standing up for her and questioned why she had to endure such pressure in the household. Chairman Kong, who ranks second in the family hierarchy despite his excellent work performance, had not yet been entrusted with the family company because he didn't have a male heir. Sora's words struck a deep chord, emphasizing her age and her husband's apparent reluctance to intervene in her favor. Feeling hurt and humiliated, Han Sora left and called her close friend, Rail, to share her distress. The two friends comforted each other over the phone and made plans to go shopping together the next day. The day after, during a parent meeting at the preschool, Rail meticulously planned the anniversary event for the school. She suggested inviting famous individuals from various fields to give speeches. This idea received enthusiastic support from the parents, and all credit for the effort went to Han Sora. After the meeting, Rail asked Han Sora whom she wanted to invite. Sora suggested inviting lawyer Seo Eun-pyong, an aspiring presidential candidate. When she heard this name, Rail immediately volunteered to handle this task herself. Let me take care of inviting lawyer Seo, Rail offered confidently. Impressed by Rail's determination and competence, Han Sora started to see her in a different light. They went shopping together at a luxurious store to relieve their stress. Sora noticed the stark contrast between her life and Rail's. When she was upset, she felt isolated and lonely in her spacious and empty house, while Rail, a wealthy individual, had all the resources and company she needed. Sora had been grappling with the pressure of not having a male heir to secure her husband's company's inheritance, as well as feeling neglected by her husband. Rail's advice seemed sound, though it wasn't easy to discuss openly. Therefore, Han Sora took Rail back to her home and asked all the household staff to leave. Rail's plan was to teach Han Sora how to dance the tango, emphasizing that physical fitness would help her regain her youthful spirit. Rail suggested that their tango performance could be the opening act at the school's anniversary event, and they could invite other parents to join in. This way, Han Sora would shine brightly at the event, making others envious. Sora was truly pleased with Rail's idea and her newfound friend's support. Just then, Chairman Kong returned home. Han Sora instructed Rail to fetch an extra glass and enjoy a glass of wine with them. Rail deliberately brushed past Chairman Kong, making physical contact with him. She then went to the kitchen to fetch a glass from the top shelf, but another hand reached out naturally, gently taking her hand. Their hands entwined, creating an electrifying atmosphere in the room. Fortunately, Chairman Kong stopped himself before things went too far. He asked Rail if she had any ulterior motives and why she was behaving so boldly in his house. Rail claimed it was all a spontaneous act, but Chairman Kong believed that everyone around him had ulterior motives and vowed to investigate Rail's intentions for approaching him in such a way. Back in the living room, the two couples enjoyed their wine together. Rail's husband constantly flattered Chairman Kong and his wife. Chairman Kong took the opportunity to ask how Rail and her husband had met and how she managed to have such a young child already attending preschool. Little did they know that Rail and her husband had a prior contract together. Rail and her husband answered without giving any clues, and Chairman Kong didn't suspect anything unusual. Before leaving, Rail mentioned to Chairman Kong that she had a performance scheduled for the following day and asked if he would be interested in attending. She hinted that it would be an opportunity for them to explore their own world together. Chairman Kong didn't respond to Rail's invitation. The next day, Han Sora arrived at Rail's workplace for her tango lesson. She was amazed by Rail's beauty and expressed her admiration openly. Rail's intention wasn't to make Han Sora feel embarrassed but to use this opportunity to create tension between the two women. Rail had set this meeting up with Han Sora and the other mothers in advance. Rael wanted them all to compete with each other, and at the same time, 3 handsome male dancers entered the scene. The other mothers were about to leave in excitement, but Han Sora remained optimistic even though she didn't have enough money. Rael received a call from lawyer Seo at this moment. He agreed to participate in the school's anniversary event. Han Sora was delighted, and Meng rushed to his father to claim credit. This was an opportunity to expand their network and strengthen the Han family's political position. The events were unfolding as Rael had planned, and her strategies were slowly coming to fruition. The next day, lawyer Seo visited the preschool but didn't want to reveal Rael's true identity directly. Instead, he told her about his own background. He shared that he was an orphan who had been fortunate enough to find a benefactor who treated him like a son and even sponsored his education. The benefactor he was talking about was none other than Chairman Kong himself. Seo handed over some documents related to Chairman Kong to Rael. As Rael left the school with the documents, she noticed that Mr. Kim saw her talking to lawyer Seo. In a haste, she left the premises and returned home with the documents. Rael and Ms. Zhang examined the documents and discovered that Chairman Kong was actually Chairman Kang's illegitimate child. His mother had been a lowly maid, which explained why Chairman Kang's father had hesitated to hand over the company to him. Rael felt a twinge of sympathy for Chairman Kong. Meanwhile, Han Sora was still contemplating whether to practice with the male dance partner Rael had arranged for her. She received a call from her doctor requesting an overnight hormone treatment to increase her chances of conceiving a son. The stress caused by the tango lessons had led to a hormonal imbalance. When Han Sora's daughter saw her father, she became frightened and had an accident. Chairman Kong rushed to comfort his daughter, and Rael apologized profusely. Han Sora had to leave due to her appointment, so she asked Rael to take her daughter home. Rael took this opportunity to explore Chairman Kang's secret room. Chairman Kang's daughter showed Rael to his office, where Rael asked the girl to leave. She then began searching for evidence. Among the many business books, she found one related to tango that piqued her interest. Inside the book, she discovered an old newspaper clipping. At this moment, Dobby entered the room, startling Rael. Dobby told her that she had once seen her father entering a secret room, and that's how she knew about it. She showed Rael how to open the secret door behind the bookshelf, leading to a hidden room filled with incriminating documents, gold, and other illicit materials from the company. Rael was finally uncovering the evidence she had been searching for. However, Chairman Kong returned home, and Rael was informed that he was heading toward the study. Rael quickly closed the secret door, ensuring that neither she nor Dobby would be discovered. Rael's encounter with the lawyer Seo Eun-pyung at her home added a new layer of complexity to her situation. Seo Eun-pyung cautioned her against pursuing revenge, emphasizing that Chairman Kong was not an ordinary person and that attempting to get close to him for revenge might not be a foolproof plan. Rael, however, refused to acknowledge her true identity and persisted in her mission. Seo Eun-pyung noticed a tattoo on Rael's back, which triggered his memories of her from the time when she was injured. This further confirmed Rael's identity, but she continued to claim that the emotional scars from rejection were far worse than physical wounds. The lawyer, out of concern for her, advised Rael not to jeopardize her entire life for the sake of revenge. He even offered to protect her, given his newfound capabilities. However, Rael remained resolute in her pursuit of vengeance. Late at night, Han Sora returned home and found her husband in a state of extreme fear. She had arranged for a security guard to be with him, but since Chairman Kong returned home early, she had to leave him alone. Chairman Kong didn't inquire much about her absence and went back to his study. However, he later discovered signs that a book on his shelf had been tampered with. Inside the book related to tango, he found a newspaper clipping revealing news about his biological mother's accident, suggesting that his true identity might have been exposed. On the day of the performance on Saturday, Chairman Kong met Rael at their agreed-upon meeting place. He offered her a chance to escape, a chance to preserve her image as a good woman in her husband's mind, and a chance to avoid the tragic fate of a news headline. However, Rael, driven by her desire for revenge, was unafraid. She approached Chairman Kong, telling him that she had no intention of running away and that she wanted him. The tension between Rael and Chairman Kong continued to escalate as their complicated relationship deepened, leaving the story at a critical juncture. In Han Sosa's birthday party, the wealthy tycoon Kong Si-guillaume engaged in a disturbing conversation with Rael. He insinuated with a few words that Rael had already stolen his heart and now had to take responsibility. This man happened to be Chu Tik Kang's older brother, and his true nature became apparent as he continued to drink. He taunted Rael, suggesting that he might send his child to Rael's dance class to get to know her better, hinting at the mysterious depths within her. As the argument escalated, Chu Tik Kang's mind was filled with images of his brother's inappropriate behavior towards Rael, and he became consumed with jealousy. He slammed down his drink and angrily approached the two of them, saying, "You're drunk. Leave now." How do you give a gift that truly touches a girl's heart? One of the top choices is to gift her a Matryoshka doll. It's like peeling an onion. After building up anticipation, you might find that there's nothing inside, leading to increasing despair. But if you're handsome, you can respond like Dr. Seo. Actually, there's nothing inside. Having no plans is my biggest plan. My heart doesn't belong to me anymore. Just remember that no matter what you do, I'm here for you. Do whatever you want. Facing Sora's torment, the female bodyguard remained silent. Sora searched for her phone and found a contact labeled as VIP in her phone. She dialed the number, thinking it must be the person she was looking for. Although Rail didn't answer her call, Sora checked her location on the phone. Seeing that Rail was in a different role now and not the innocent Sora she used to know, she called back immediately, disguising it as a medical consultation. Without saying a word, she sent a text message stating that if Sora released the female bodyguard, she would appear at the designated location at noon tomorrow. Sora knew that she wouldn't keep her word, but it might lessen the physical suffering of the innocent woman. Afterward, she asked lawyer Seo to leave and rescue the female bodyguard. Perhaps helping an innocent person in pain would make her feel slightly better. Or maybe she had other motives, as Sora wanted to be in the best condition when meeting the person referred to as the VIP guest tomorrow. The makeup artist knew it was Dobby's birthday today and wanted to help Sora with a sophisticated, parent-like makeup style. However, Sora hesitated, teasingly mentioning that she was upset and felt like arguing with someone in the chat. Sora wished to have fancy makeup done, checking the time occasionally. There were less than 2 hours left until noon. She wore a glamorous dress to attend the birthday party, shining and radiant, and accepted everyone's birthday wishes for her daughter. But her mind was not at the party. She kept glancing at the clock, eager to know who the other person was. As noon approached, she would be called back if the other person arrived. She meticulously checked every corner of the daycare center parking lot. Time quickly passed, and it was already 12 o'clock. A woman wearing 12 centimeters high heels and a green floral dress entered. She had a diamond necklace around her neck. Her seductive eyeliner drew the attention of everyone, including me and the viewers. She walked gracefully into the hall, and her stunning outfit would make her the center of attention wherever she went. She calmly chatted with everyone, showing no urgency, even though she was about to face Sora. What was she doing? Sora looked at Rail, thinking that maybe the other person wouldn't show up after all. Rail finally stepped forward in front of Sora. I saw the news. You weren't hurt. How could you have been? The one who gets hurt and wants to hurt others will come today, Rail said. She looked at Sora, who was still clueless, and tilted her head. She couldn't stand this foolish woman any longer. Raising her hand, Rail intentionally dropped her handbag from above to create a loud noise. Here we are, precisely at 12 o'clock. I'm right on time, she stated, taunting Sora, who still didn't understand. The mysterious woman was right in front of her now. She had never considered her as her best friend forever. For the first time, Rail faced Sora with arrogance. I won't fake my face anymore. I'm flipping the board now, she declared. Rail touched the necklace full of diamonds that Yoon Guillaume had given her. She ran her hand through her hair provocatively, making Sora's hands tremble with anger. Haven't you been told to release the bodyguard? Why didn't you keep your promise? Rail asked. When she accurately recited the contents of the text message, Sora finally believed that the woman before her was the VIP she had been looking for. Sora realized that she had been played by Rail in a power game, where she was both the robber and the kingpin. You enjoyed yourself that night, didn't you? She asked, interrupting the reporter's interview. Rail deliberately acted friendly, making Sora fume with anger, yet Sora was unable to release her hidden anger. You madwoman. The upbringing of the tycoon has prevented you from flipping the table in front of the camera, Sora said, her frustration visible. While Sora was conducting an interview, Rail left the scene. Sora chased after her, wanting to kill her. I'll tear your heart into 100 pieces, she threatened. This kind of intimidation meant nothing to Rail, who reminded Sora, what do you want? Why did I have to do this? What will you do in the future? Sora had no answers. She had never thought from the perspective of being the victim. Anyone who annoyed her was immediately dealt with. She didn't need to think much. She suggested that Sora should consider why unfortunate events always happened to her. Why? If you find the answer, maybe I'll forgive you a little, Rail said. What caused the elderly people and a group of young men to engage in a fight in such a grand and beautiful hall? The old man threw 2 consecutive high kicks in the air, which made me burst into laughter. Yesterday, Yoon Guillaume's Lee Pei Group successfully went public. He used thousands of luxury drones to create the company's emblem, and people were buying the stocks without realizing it was actually a joint venture between Han Pan-ro and Kong Bon-jun. Yoon Guillaume had quietly built Lee Pei, and as soon as it went public, he could leverage massive funds. To purchase the circulating shares of LY, they decided to find him and negotiate. However, they were met by Yoon Guillaume's pre-arranged bodyguards. The 2 elderly gentlemen, who were already at odds, began to quarrel and insult each other. It was a wild political parasite, a parasite in the world of tycoons. As the top henchman, Yoon Chul would naturally step in, but before he could say anything, he got slapped. He had never been so angry before. When Kong Bon-jun wanted to slap him again, Dung Exio Yoon Chul pulled him back, and the protection wanted to intervene, resulting in further chaos. Given the favorable circumstances and the presence of interested parties, both sides eagerly engaged in the brawl. They didn't care about who was hitting whom. As long as it wasn't their own, they saw it as a fight. Pan-ro was afraid of being criticized for not knowing how to fight, so he used his practiced high kicks. With his unique martial arts skills, he kicked twice into the air, and I hadn't seen anyone get hit yet. Han Pan-ro was unaware of who he was facing off against. It wasn't just Yoon Guillaume. The documents that Rail provided to Yoon Guillaume at the birthday party the previous day were an essential part of Yoon Guillaume's strategy for going public. Jin Wook was also unable to withstand Rail's cold demeanor. He begged Rail to reconcile with him and revealed a secret in a couriered package to her. This package contained documents related to the semiconductor company that Director Kim had investigated earlier. None of it was related to him, and he was lying to Rail. However, Rail didn't expose his lie right then. Instead, she recorded everything he said as evidence, which she would later use for legal action, and handed it over to Moon-hee. On the other side, Sora was still in a shopping spree, choosing various expensive pieces of jewelry as if she were a queen, trying to relieve her stress from the high-pressure situation. When Han Pan-ro found out about the incident on the news, he realized that something significant had happened. He was determined to find Sora and have a proper conversation with her. Sora was aware that her father was looking for her, and she was nervously biting her fingers. Sora was the one who understood her father's tactics best. When Han Pan-ro found her, she could only cry out in frustration and run away. Meanwhile, Yoon Guillaume, who was initially not in a good mood, arrived at Rail's house but only encountered Moon-hee. After receiving a warning from Moon-hee, he returned to the party. He was surprised to receive a gift from Rail, a bandoneon. This bandoneon held deep meaning for Yoon Guillaume, as Rail hoped it would provide solace for his inner pain, as well as a connection to his deceased mother. Yoon Guillaume didn't know that this might be Rail's final farewell to him. However, he couldn't forget that Moon-hee, after meeting with him, couldn't bear the pressure of Rail's time bomb any longer. Moon-hee called someone and publicly revealed Rail's identity as the daughter of Lee Tae-jun to Yoon Guillaume, urging him to act quickly. Rail was wearing sunglasses and had a large, flashy gold chain bag over her shoulder. She was marveling at the success of her plan. For the past 2 days, she hadn't seen Sora, and she was surprised to receive a notification. At this moment, Sora was hosting a parent-teacher meeting, and the only person not invited was Rail. Rail followed other parents into the meeting room, slowly removing her sunglasses as she entered. She had applied unconventional makeup with single-colored blue eyeshadow and light brown eyebrows, which made people puzzled. Despite being somewhat out of place among the makeup professionals, Rail's beauty still shone brightly and captivated everyone's attention. When Sora saw Rail, she wasn't pleased at all that an uninvited guest had shown up. Rail's expression remained calm, but inside, she felt something was strange. Why was Sora still in a mood to host such an event after enduring such a shock? As soon as the Lee Pei group went public successfully, Sora slapped Rail out of nowhere. "Didn't you want to tell me the reason?" She slapped Rail again, and Rail remained unfazed. Instead, she issued a warning to everyone present that approaching or getting close to her meant they were confronting her. She also contemplated how to deal with her former subordinates. Rail was slapped twice but didn't leave immediately. On the contrary, she smiled indifferently at Sora, who, after confirming that her plan had affected Sora, turned and left. Rail was confident that Sora couldn't escape her grip. However, what Rail couldn't understand was Sora's current state of mind and stability. After the meeting, Rail went to find Sora alone, and it turned out that thanks to Rail's actions, Sora received compensation from Yoon Guillaume. Not only did it end the Cold War with Yoon Guillaume, but it also secured control of the shopping center. Sora couldn't allow herself to be inferior to others. She intentionally put on a smiling face, provoking the woman she despised. She cheerfully claimed that she had found happiness thanks to her misfortune. Rail didn't realize that Sora's triumphant smile was mocking her. All of this was because Yoon Guillaume had asked for Sora's help to ensure the smooth listing of Lee Pei. Rail went to see lawyer Seo, perhaps the only person who could help her avoid the storm that her fate had in store. She needed someone to confide in. Rail didn't understand what was happening. She could only watch the news in shock. Lawyer Seo was there to comfort her. Rail suddenly became less confident, and fear crept in. She worried that she might fail, and the only person she cared about right now was Moon-hee, whom she now referred to as her mother. Rail asked lawyer Seo, "If something uncertain happens to me, can you help her, please?" Despite her fundamentally kind nature, Rail hadn't completely turned dark or vengeful. Her goodness was merely temporarily hidden beneath the surface. Just as Rail was about to leave, lawyer Seo called her back. He had suppressed his feelings for too long. In the past, he didn't want to burden her, so he had concealed his emotions. But now, he had changed, and the weight on his heart was heavier than ever before. Rail remained silent, not responding. Lawyer Seo continued, "I've held back for too long. I didn't want to burden you before, so I hid my feelings. But now, I've changed, and I'm heavier than I used to be." Rail remained silent. He confessed his love sincerely, "I love you." In the face of lawyer Seo's heartfelt confession, Rail couldn't provide an immediate answer. He reassured her, "You don't have to answer me right now. You just need to know that even if the world falls apart, I'll still stand by your side. There's one person in this world who cares for you this much. When you've done everything you want to do, then tell me the answer to this confession. I'll always be waiting for you." In that moment, he was just like any man deeply infatuated, ready to wait indefinitely for the one he loved. A top Korean tycoon proposed once again at a crumbling church. Chairman Kong placed a ring on Rael's finger and then solemnly asked, "Lee Rael, do you dare to say in front of God that the man standing before you is the one you love?" The unexpected proposal left Rael at a loss for words. Initially, she had approached Chairman Kong as part of a revenge scheme, but their relationship had evolved over time. Rael had developed genuine feelings for Chairman Kong, which now weighed heavily on her conscience, especially considering her deceased father's memory, and she couldn't bear the guilt. Overwhelmed, she fainted, leaving the proposal unanswered. Please note that this translation is based on the provided text and may not capture the full emotional nuances of the original language. The next day, Rael and Chairman Kong went for a walk on the beach. This scene was seen by Han Sora's bodyguard. The bodyguard immediately reported this to her. Han ordered the bodyguards to take Rael away while Chairman Kong was not there, and then handle it anyway. At this time, Rael was completely unaware of the danger that was approaching. She was still focused on her sincere confession of Chairman Kong, but fell into a tragic situation. Looking at Rael's expression, President Kong knew that it was not a coincidence that she fainted. He asked her why she fainted when he proposed, but Rael still found a way to escape. President Kong grabbed her hand, then pulled out her sleeve. Under the bandage was the wound she had recently cut with a knife. This wound made him understand that Rael's heart was not at peace, like a wave crashing over a broken castle in the dark. President Kong wanted Rael to face him frankly, but hatred and the closeness of love causing her to be suffocated. Life can only be like this, only one of two. A great man once said that it is impossible to balance between love and work, let alone hatred. Returning to her room, Rael received a message from Senator Sell, who had arrived at the meeting place Rael had with Chairman Kong after he left. Senator Sell came here with a special purpose, to ask Rael to give up her feelings for Chairman Kong. Rael stood silently, not responding, and after delivering his message, Lawyer Seo sadly left. As Rael was preparing to return to her room, a man in black blocked her path. She sensed his ill intentions and tried to flee, but two more individuals quickly appeared and apprehended her. At that moment, a man came from behind and attacked the bodyguards. It turned out to be Lawyer Seo, who had heard the cries for help and rushed to Rael's aid, using a branch turned into a makeshift weapon. During a press conference announcing the establishment of the company's Strategic Operations Division, Rael was put in charge of this division, which aimed to control all the company's financial flows, essentially equivalent to holding the company's lifeline. Han Pan-ro, upon hearing this news, expressed disbelief, considering it trivial. Next, during the press conference, the legal team disclosed to the public that the lawsuit amounted to 10 trillion won, a massive compensation amount that quickly shook the nation. Han Sosa, who was acting as her own lawyer, rushed to her father's designated retreat to vent her frustration but unexpectedly received a painful slap from her father. Han Pan-ro realized that this girl was different from the women in the past, and with this situation, if he were to intervene, all the past secrets would be exposed. Rael, in light of this, became more convinced that Han Sosa was the mastermind behind her mother's murder. She visited Lawyer Seo at the hospital, who had just regained consciousness. Lawyer Seo was more concerned about Rael's safety than his own. Seeing how genuinely Lawyer Seo cared for her, Rael now understood why love wasn't always about possessing someone but sometimes just loving unrequitedly and finding joy in their happiness. To counter Han Sora, Rael also played her cards. The two mistresses confronted Han Sora, and the two teachers separately went to the police station to report the incident. This hot news was captured by a passing reporter and quickly spread online, tarnishing Han Sora's already not-so-great image. Even the First Lady, who had a good relationship with Han Sora, called to sever ties. At this moment, the front door opened, and Han Sora thought it was Chairman Kong returning. However, to her surprise, it was Rael who confidently entered and promptly had her escorted out by security. Her two bodyguards immediately intervened to remove Han Sora. With no other options, Han Sora went to find Chairman Kong to plead her case. She even professed her willingness to give up everything, including her career, to live solely for him and their future together. She claimed that no one could replace him in her life, sounding quite desperate. Chairman Kong firmly pushed her away and sent her out the door. Han Sora noticed the new ring on his finger, and her desperate gaze followed her as she left his house, completely broken and filled with delusional images, waving in the air as if going mad. Closing her eyes with a sigh, Rael recalled that she chose to walk into Yoon Guillaume's arms to avoid Yoon Guillaume's proposal. Yoon Guillaume hastily called Rael's foster mother, knowing that this wasn't a forced engagement but a conspiracy. Jang Moon-hee, seeing the two confessing their feelings in front of her, understood that if it wasn't love, how could they subject themselves to such suffering? Rael clearly couldn't control her feelings for Yoon Guillaume. Loving someone who reciprocates your feelings is the most painful thing in the world. At this moment, even her foster mother didn't know what Rail would do next. Jang Moon-hee confided in Eun Pyong about this situation. Although she had always used Rail to her advantage, she didn't want to see her suffer and die because of love. She hoped that Eun Pyong could offer some advice to Rail. However, she didn't know that Eun Pyong also deeply loved Rail. Rail and Yoon Guillaume went for a walk by the seaside, discussing the possibility of having children. Unbeknownst to them, they were being followed. Han Sora ordered her bodyguards to apprehend Rail. Regardless of whether it was a matter of life or death, Yoon Guillaume had a plan. They would go abroad for their honeymoon, as Rail loved tango. He could take her to the place where tango was born and settle there, giving up everything for her. However, Rail suddenly smiled triumphantly because she had refused. Yoon Guillaume asked her what secret she was hiding that made her resort to self-harm. But her cryptic words piled up, making it impossible to tell who was sincere anymore. Eun Pyong confronted Rail, questioning whether she had truly fallen in love with Yoon Guillaume. What was she going to do? If she left, where would she go? Would everyone just let her be if she left with Yoon Guillaume? Eun Pyong, hearing these words, grew frustrated. He couldn't stand the thought of her leaving with Yoon Guillaume. But he didn't know what to do himself, and he felt overwhelmed. He was at a loss. Eun Pyong left in disappointment, and Rail also walked away with dreams and hopes in her heart. However, she was suddenly surrounded by a group of people who accused her of making false accusations. No one came to her aid. Just when Eun Pyong had turned away and was about to leave, he suddenly reappeared to rescue her. However, one person couldn't take on a whole group unless they were a professional fighter. One of the men in the group pulled out a knife and charged, while another man in a black suit recognized Eun Pyong and got scared, quickly fleeing. When Han Sora learned that Eun Pyong had been stabbed, she turned pale. She knew that Eun Pyong was now the mayor's secretary. If his condition was discovered, it could create a huge scandal. She quickly instructed someone to investigate Eun Pyong's condition. Over at the hospital, the first thing Eun Pyong wanted to do after waking up was to leave the hospital as soon as possible. He believed that doing so would protect Rail. But good people sometimes didn't get the empathy they deserved. However, Rail argued that the one thing you shouldn't avoid in life is love. She pointed out how love can change a person when someone loves them, but she didn't reflect on herself and the wound she had inflicted. Eun Pyong made a decision to speak his true feelings. He encouraged Rail to love Yoon Guillaume, explaining that love didn't mean possession. Sometimes, loving someone unrequitedly and seeing them happy is what truly matters. He also mentioned that people who criticize such love as simping are shallow. Rail, with her determination and the motivation of her grudge, finally rose up in the business world. She won the trust of Lee Corporation's chairman thanks to their personal connection, which allowed her to become the director of a publicly traded company. She easily secured collaborations with 5 factories and other companies, proving that sometimes, the saying, "It's not what you know, but who you know," holds true. Rail announced her intention to use 8-inch semiconductor wafers, a core technology contributed by the renowned businessman Lee Tae-ju, who also happened to be her father. During this gathering, it seemed like Rail had gained control over the core of the entire conglomerate. Han Pan-ro, upon learning this news, became extremely furious to the point of nearly having a stroke. His lawyers suggested filing a divorce lawsuit worth hundreds of billions of won, further escalating his anger. As for Eun Dam-ri, who now knew Han Sora's true face, they had mistakenly sent the wrong person to apprehend the man from that day. He had been beaten up but eventually went to the police station voluntarily, confessing everything in detail. Meanwhile, a passing journalist had overheard the conversation, and the news quickly became a hot trending topic on all platforms. Han Sora found herself at a dead end. The First Lady even called her to cut all ties with Han Sora. The situation reached its peak when Rail confidently arrived, with an impressive aura, to kick Sora out of the house. "This is my house. What right do you have to kick me out?" protested Han Sora. Kwon, who was present, supported Rail, and Han Sora was left bewildered. She couldn't understand how she had ended up in this situation. She had lost everything. Desperate, she knelt down in a dark corner, embracing herself. Within a matter of hours, her life had turned upside down, and she had no idea who was wealthier. The only one who brought her some comfort was her bodyguard. It turned out he had uncovered information about Rail. 7 years ago, Rail had become the daughter of Jang Moon-ji, who had changed her name to Jang Moon-hee. Han Sora immediately recognized who she was. Rail's true identity had slowly been exposed, but she still searched for opportunities to enter Yoon Guillaume's secret room. She wanted to spend a day at home and decided to use Dobby as a way to get inside. When Yoon Guillaume left, Rail and Dobby sneaked into the room together. Rail intentionally led Dobby into Yoon Guillaume's secret room, watching as the 3-year-old skillfully entered the password. Even a 3-year-old child could be manipulated by Rail. Afterwards, she instructed the household staff to take both children away. Then, she entered the secret room, having learned from her previous experience. This time, she brought her phone to take pictures and document everything. First, she took a panoramic shot of the room, then proceeded to photograph each important document without leaving anything out. After carefully inspecting and counting everything, she finally found the document she had been looking for. It was covered in dried red stains. Rael recalled the painful memories of her father being abused and forced to sign a transfer contract. She was lost in those painful memories when Yoon Guillaume suddenly appeared behind her. Rael was caught red-handed. In the art of seduction, there are 7,749 tricks, and using a seductive beauty's wiles and then offering sweet pineapple is the most effective way to escape this dire situation. If you were in Rael's shoes, how would you explain yourself? Yoon Guillaume asked why Rael knew about this room, but before she could answer, Dobby came in to rescue her. Yoon Guillaume deeply cared for his son, so he decided not to press the issue further. This was the second time Dobby had saved Rael. She could finally breathe, but she couldn't escape Yoon Guillaume's suspicion. He still felt that something was off and hoped that Rael would confide in him. However, Rael was determined to avoid this topic. Despite Yoon Guillaume's deep love for her, he was not a pushover. He was determined to uncover her secrets. Yoon Guillaume told her, "I will find out what this is." Rael quickly conveyed this information to Jang Moon-hee and sent her all the pictures she had taken in the secret room. However, she was unaware that her foster mother had been captured by Han Sora's subordinates. Even as her identity was gradually being exposed, she continued to defy Sora, even spitting water in her face, which left me quite satisfied. The security personnel decided to take action against her, subjecting her to brutal torture. Han Sora quickly began to apply makeup to herself, looking exceptionally beautiful, and she was in a very cheerful mood. Her secretary inquired about the reason for her happiness. The secretary asked, "Is there something that's making you so happy today?" Han Sora replied, "It's because it's the weekend, and it's time to relax and enjoy some fun activities." Sora invited Rael for a drink and, in a seemingly kind gesture, revealed Rael's real name, Lee Rael. Rael felt threatened and her expression changed, but Sora continued with a mocking tone. Afterwards, Han Sora approached Yoon Guillaume, and Rael hesitated to get close. Sora invited her to sit down and talk. In front of Yoon Guillaume, she revealed some photos of Rael from her high school days and exposed her true identity. Despite the revelation, Rael tried to maintain a facade of calmness. Han Sora wore a triumphant smile, while Yoon Guillaume remained silent, just staring at Rael. Skepticism can erode trust over time. The photos presented right in front of Yoon Guillaume were like a drop of ink that would gradually spread throughout the glass of water. Despite Yoon Guillaume verbally expressing trust in Rael, Han Sora knew she had won. Rael continued her explanations, revealing why she had changed her name. She mentioned that her mother had remarried, leading to her name change. Yoon Guillaume's response was quite reserved. Rael asked if he doubted her, wanting to prove herself. Yoon Guillaume tore up all the photos and documents related to her. He always knew that Rael had secrets but willingly waited, hoping that Rael would eventually open up and reveal the truth so they could resolve things calmly. Afterward, Rael called Eun Pyong and informed him that both her and Jang Moon-hee's identities had been discovered by Han Sora. Only the ZX Semiconductor Company's secret had not been exposed yet. Rael sneakily tried to retrieve the torn documents, but this scene was spotted by Yoon Guillaume, who was standing on the upper floor. In his heart, a significant change was taking place. Rael began to initiate the dismissal of the employees involved in the murder of her father back then, based on their current statuses. No one dared to touch her. Even Jang Jin-wook, Rael's ex-husband, received a call from a lawyer on that day. However, Rael suddenly cancelled the meeting and left the company. This made Yoon Guillaume very suspicious. Rael went to Jang Moon-hee's house and asserted that she had been taken by Han Sora, so she left in a hurry. However, she was unaware that Yoon Guillaume was following her. Rael went to the hospital to visit Eun Pyong and had an important conversation with her. Then, she went to find Han Sora. Suddenly, Yoon Guillaume's car passed by, and it was noticed by Eun Pyong's secretary. Eun Pyong, knowing that Yoon Guillaume was following Rael and not wanting to get involved in the situation, called Yoon Guillaume to arrange a meeting. Eun Pyong, after sharing the incident of being attacked by someone connected to Yoon Guillaume, made Yoon Guillaume suspicious and questioned whether he loved Rael or not. Yoon Guillaume responded by saying that his love for Rael was characterized by sacrifice. Despite his suspicions, he affirmed his love for her. Eun Pyong asserted that the person who could always be by Rael's side was him. Rael confronted Han Sora, revealing information about her bodyguard's contact details that she had obtained through the camera, as well as Sora's involvement in the attack on Eun Pyong. With this information exposed, Han Sora had no place to stand in Korea and would have to go into exile. Rael made a simple demand: release Jang Moon-hee, and she would spare Yoon Guillaume. Han Sora, in this situation, had no choice but to reluctantly agree. After returning home, Rael immediately instructed her bodyguard to take good care of Jang Moon-hee and ensure that there were no mistakes. Rael once again entered Yoon Guillaume's study, but the password had been changed. She could only stay outside and search for documents, unaware that every move was being recorded. Yoon Guillaume, looking through the camera, appeared very tense. In his head, he replayed a conversation with Eun Pyong, where he asked what love meant to him. Eun Pyong was willing to sacrifice everything for Rail, so what could he do for himself? Would he just indulge her in whatever she liked? Then Yoon Guillaume asked Rail to fetch him a gift. Rail happened to find documents regarding her father's company's acquisition from that year. Afraid she might run out of time, she called Eun Pyong to inform him of her decision to leave Yoon Guillaume tonight. At Han Pan-ro's house, there was also a significant operation underway. He knew that someone was suing him, and furthermore, he had gathered quite a bit of evidence. He asked Eun Pyong if he knew who that person was. Eun Pyong pretended to be clueless, with a vacant look in his eyes. As soon as he left the door, he called Rail to inform her of the situation. A day earlier, Han Pan-ro had thoroughly investigated the identities of Rail and Jang Moon-hee. Indeed, he had uncovered information about Jang Moon-hee. They assigned their security guard, Moon, to investigate this matter further. However, when he heard the name Jang Moon-hee, his expression immediately changed. Of course, he was also discovered by the two old cunning individuals in front of him. Elsewhere, Rail had secured her escape plan and once again threatened Han Sora to release Jang Moon-hee quickly. Sora panicked and, upon returning home, called the security guards. To her surprise, there was no one here, and Jang Moon-hee was nowhere to be found. Just moments ago, Rail's revenge plan had been discovered by Yoon Guillaume. He confronted her, questioning why she hadn't taken all of his money if she wanted to express her love. In an effort to show his affection, Yoon Guillaume had given Rail all of his shares. He told her that if she liked money, he could give her money, but he only wanted to take her to the romantic land of Turkey, dance the tango together, and raise a family. Rail was deeply moved and tears welled up in her eyes. This man was treating her too well. However, she couldn't love him. What could be more painful than someone who loved her but couldn't be with her? Life can be so bitter. Later, Rail brought the documents regarding the company's acquisition in that year to Eun Pyong. He felt confident that they would win. However, at this moment, Rail appeared to have a lifeless expression. It was because Yoon Guillaume had actively led her into the secret room, and perhaps she was feeling a bit hesitant. Eun Pyong said they didn't have to make these documents public, but if they did, she wouldn't be able to face her father at the Suoi Vang estate. She wanted to tell Yoon Guillaume herself that, compared to the deceit in love, she wanted to be genuine with her heart for once. So, Rail arranged to meet Yoon Guillaume. Suddenly, he felt a mix of relief and anger, sensing that the naive man had finally realized this. At the same time, Jang Moon-hee was being carried down to the basement. These two men planned to prepare a little taste when she woke up. But unexpectedly, Jang Moon-hee woke up early and secretly turned on the GPS device in her pocket. Rail had now received her signal. She immediately investigated the location of that secret room. Unexpectedly, the location was Han Pan-ro's house. She quickly asked Eun Pyong for help. He immediately reported Jang Moon-hee missing to the police. Furthermore, the police were also contacted and raided Han Pan-ro's house. Han Sora was now desperately afraid of losing Yoon Guillaume. She was determined to ensure that her security guards brought Jang Moon-hee back, even if it meant going against her father's wishes. Meanwhile, Han Pan-ro was reviewing the lawsuits and discovered sentences that he had previously uttered. He immediately became aware that his house had been bugged. He instructed his subordinates to thoroughly check every nook and cranny with a bug detection device, and indeed, they found numerous listening devices scattered around the room. At this moment, Yoon Guillaume had arrived at the appointed meeting place but couldn't find Rail. He received a call from his father and learned that their company was being sued by someone else. He was told that the representative plaintiff in the lawsuit was Jang Moon-hee, along with the daughter of ZX Corporation. When he heard that the ZX Corporation's daughter was involved, he realized that their company was in serious trouble. He immediately recalled Rail's mother, also named Jang Moon-hee. He rushed to find the contract from back then, which was no longer in the secret room. Upon reflection, he remembered that Rail had held onto that document before. All the pieces of the puzzle had come together, and he realized that all scenarios had been scripted. Yoon Guillaume went to the villa to find Rail. Rail's car was still warm, but suddenly, he heard a loud noise from outside. This immediately put Rail on alert, and she cautiously went to check the source of the disturbance. After running through a long, narrow tunnel, she finally returned to the living room. However, when she descended, she only saw her car standing still without making any noise. Yoon Guillaume had somehow used some kind of magic to enter a secret path leading to the basement. When he entered the secret room, it was filled with surveillance cameras. What was even more terrifying were the photos plastered on the wall, depicting people with complicated relationships with each other, with him at the center. If he were in a K-pop group, he would have occupied the entire poster. but real life wasn't like TV, and he was just an important supporting character. The two looked into each other's eyes. Rael was extremely shocked, while Yoon Guillaume's gaze was filled with hostility. She thought all she needed was money, and Yoon Guillaume had given her all his shares because he believed she could do anything. But he couldn't understand why she would treat him this way. He felt that she was just trying to ruin his life. At this moment, Rael felt very vulnerable, despite her physical strength. She couldn't escape the anger lurking in Yoon Guillaume's subconscious, and he eventually threw her to the ground. Seeing Rael injured, Yoon Guillaume finally realized he had gone too far. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but Rael quickly fled, keeping her distance. Rael swiftly turned off her charm and nodded sweetly with every word, then quickly ran away. Yoon Guillaume chased after her closely. However, as soon as they went outside, Rael, who had been waiting since evening, pushed him and he fell, hitting his head on the wall, rendering him unconscious. Rael had successfully escaped. But her adoptive mother is not okay at all. Jang Moon-hee is locked in the basement of Han Pan-so's house. Furthermore, he was beaten and tortured extremely brutally. But no matter how they questioned, she also did not open her mouth to reveal anything. She could not die. Han Sora wanted to use her in exchange for her husband. While they were carrying people up from the basement, Han Pan-ro suddenly came there. Seeing Han Sora wanted to take Jang Moon-hee away, he scolded his daughter for being stupid. If Jang Moon-hee's lawsuit is successful, he will have to repent in eternal prison. But Han Sora did not want to divorce her husband. The father and son immediately argued loudly, but Jang Moon-hee had already woken up. But unexpectedly, he was discovered by that bastard Kim Jung-chul. The old man cruelly threw her to the ground. Han Pan-ro also kicked her, but his anger was still not over. He immediately picked up a large stone, crushed it with human conscience, and hit the back of Jang Moon-hee's head. Blood splattered onto Han Sora's face, no different from hitting a snakehead's head. At this time, Jang Moon-hee was no longer breathing. Outside, sounds from the police were transmitted inside. Eun Pyong brought the police to investigate. Han Pan-ro fearlessly arranged for his henchmen to handle the matter. Then he used the excuse of not having a search warrant to deny Eun Pyong. But he can't scare you. Eun Pyong used Jang Moon-hee's disappearance as the reason. Directly order the police to conduct a search. Every corner was searched, but no one could be found. Because Han Sora hugged Jang Moon-hee's body and hid in the basement with his bodyguards. Seeing Eun Pyong return without any harvest, Rael felt an extremely nervous feeling. She can only continue to wait for news from the police. Han Sora was beaten by his father, constantly begging him for forgiveness, but Han Pan-ro could not accept anyone betraying him behind his back. Since she's alive, she has no value, so it's better to die now. At this time, the shepherd came to report on his work and had already learned where Jang Moon-hee's body was being handled. Han Sora wants to escape from here, but for the rest of her life she will probably be locked up in this basement. The next morning, a fisherman suddenly discovered a large black bag while fishing. Upon opening it, they found the lifeless body of a woman, none other than Jang Moon-hee. Rael quickly received a phone call from the police, and when she saw her foster mother, Rael cried until her voice grew hoarse. Tears seemed unable to fall from her eyes anymore. Among Jang Moon-hee's belongings, Rael found a recording device. Inside, it contained a complete recording of conversations involving Han Pan-ro. What was even more terrifying was that Rael heard the horrifying process of her mother's murder. Her mother had been locked by Han Sora in the basement until she died of starvation. Afterward, Kim Jung-chul had disposed of her body in the river. The day had coincided with a severe storm, making it nearly impossible to find the body. Rael's heart shattered, and she couldn't comprehend how a human being could commit such a heinous act. The news of Jang Moon-hee's passing reached Yoon Guillaume's ears, and he decided to visit despite his own suspicions. Furthermore, he came to console Rael. She immediately played a recorded audio clip on her phone for Yoon Guillaume to hear how her mother had been murdered. Yoon Guillaume claimed he had no knowledge of this and insisted he was innocent, but Rael couldn't trust his words. She angrily sent him away and vowed to exact revenge on everyone. Yoon Guillaume suddenly remembered an incident from 13 years ago. A man had come to him with a photograph, and he worked for Han Sora, tasked with dealing with the woman in the picture. At that time, Yoon Guillaume had questioned Han Sora about the woman's identity, but she had lied, claiming the woman was a troublemaker who wanted to ruin their wedding and that she had died in an accident. Now, looking back, he realized that the woman in the photo was Rael's mother. Eun Pyong saw him at the funeral and couldn't resist teasing him, suggesting that being handsome wasn't enough, and one needed thick skin too. Yoon Guillaume explained that he had nothing to do with Jang Moon-hee's situation, but Eun Pyong believed that he and Han Pan-ro were cut from the same cloth and advised him to come forward voluntarily. Yoon Guillaume was now in a pitiful state. A once successful fashion designer found himself falsely accused and facing such adversity, all while being rejected by the woman he loved. His life had become a series of unfortunate events. This man had pushed Rael to her limits. She began to reverse her car, but she managed to back up right into the man's leg. The sound of grinding teeth filled the air, signaling an eventful hospital visit. There was no escape for him now. Rael walked slowly towards him, calmly looking down at him. With the 10-centimeter heel of her high-heeled shoe, she forcefully stomped on the injured leg, causing him to cry out in pain. To Rael, this man was the enemy who had killed her father. Years ago, her father had been arrested and brutally tortured to death. In pursuit of revenge, Rael and Jang Moon-hee had devised a plan together. And just yesterday, Jang Moon-hee had rid the world of this scum of society, as there was no evidence to tie him to his crimes. Now, Rael had no choice but to reveal her true identity and take on the role of a new representative in place of Jang Moon-hee. Lee Rael's return after 13 years of disappearance immediately drew a lot of attention from everyone, including Han Pan-ro and Kim Jung-chul. Kim Jung-chul had arrived earlier to prevent Rael from entering the courtroom, but he was a step too late. Rael was surrounded by a swarm of reporters, with her bodyguards clearing the way. They didn't stand a chance and had to wait until Rael exited. Rael looked into the distance and saw someone's figure, which turned out to be Kim Jung-chul standing outside. She immediately drove her car straight toward him, ultimately immobilizing his legs. Then, with an air of superiority, she tossed a business card at him, making it clear that she had the upper hand. She suggested meeting privately next time for a more civilized conversation. At the same time, Eun Pyong was in an interview where he revealed that he had been attacked. He openly accused the four individuals, Han Pan-ro, Han Sora, Kim Jung-chul, and Yoon Guillaume. Han Pan-ro was furious to the point of turning purple. But what was even more horrifying lay behind the scenes. All three law firms had withdrawn their support for Han Sora's divorce case. With the conglomerate being sued and Eun Pyong's revelations, there seemed to be no hope left for them. Han Sora sought refuge in Yoon Guillaume's house and dared not leave. She recalled the horrifying sight of Jang Moon-hee's death when she was locked in that basement. Her nerves were becoming increasingly unstable. She had taken too many lives with her own hands, and now she desperately wanted to escape that place. With the help of Moon, the bodyguard, Han Sora managed to sit in an ambulance and leave the basement. She had nowhere to go and could only beg Yoon Guillaume for help. However, Yoon Guillaume had transformed into a different person, no longer the gentle and carefree Yoon Guillaume she once knew. Now that he knew Sora was the one who had killed Rael's mother, he harbored a deep hatred for Sora, to the core of his being. But Han Sora refused to admit her guilt. Instead, she knelt down and begged for mercy. She explained that if she returned, Han Pan-ro would surely kill her. She didn't want to go back to him, and she couldn't bring herself to ask Yoon Guillaume to come back to her. She just wanted a place to hide. Although Yoon Guillaume was still furious, he couldn't ignore the desperate plea of a girl. He couldn't stand by and watch her die. So, when he locked himself in a room for several days without eating or drinking, and Han Sora brought food to him out of concern, Yoon Guillaume suddenly opened the door and went outside. In the middle of the night, Yoon Guillaume went to find Rael, hoping to apologize and offer to buy back Zedek's semiconductor, no matter the cost. He was willing to compensate her as much as she demanded, hoping that Rael could put an end to this battle. However, when he saw Rael's face, it seemed like she was not lacking in money. Yoon Guillaume went down on his knees, thinking that a few acts of kneeling would not compare to what she had been through. But in the end, it was just kneeling, and anyone could kneel. Now, everything was fair. The victim would be compensated as the perpetrator had done. As for the perpetrator, they would have to wait for their own retribution. This was true justice. Yoon Guillaume asked Rael what she wanted, and she replied that she wanted the four of them to die, just like her parents did. Only then would this battle for revenge have a happy ending. Afterward, Rael threw Yoon Guillaume's ring in front of him. From that moment on, they had severed all ties. There was no love left in their hearts, no binding commitment, no hope, and no disappointment. But as Rael turned away, she found herself disappointed, unable to cry out loud. It was simply because the word love still lingered in her heart, while the word vengeance remained firmly rooted within her. Eun Pyong arrived in a hurry to calm the situation, but just as he arrived, he witnessed Han Sora downstairs. Rael, filled with rage, saw Han Sora and promptly shattered a potted plant. She then picked up a shard from the broken pot, ready to attack Sora. Han Sora felt no need to apologize and asked Yoon Guillaume to regain his composure. Yoon Guillaume questioned why she did all of this. Clearly, she had everything, money, status, but when people have it all they need is love. Han Sora thought that Yoon Guillaume liked Zedek's semiconductor, so she took it from him as a gift. Yoon Guillaume didn't believe that was love. Love should come from the heart, not material possessions. He explained that if he wanted an apology, she could just send a message of apology to his bank account. Han Sora advised him to capture Rael for their safety. However, Yoon Guillaume now had only one wish, to have true love. He wanted to be a good person in front of Rael. Rael, from a distance, reacted strongly to this statement. Love, so deadly, had once again taken control of her heart. Eun Pyong urgently warned her not to listen and to absolutely prevent her heart from wavering again. Rael cut his own finger. She didn't want to commit suicide, but wanted to tell the enemy in front of her. The hatred of killing one's mother means that a debt of blood must be repaid with blood. During the press conference, Rael announced the contract to purchase the semiconductor company, denouncing the four suspects involved in the case. But during the trial, the judge declared that this was only a civil case. Because Rael lacked evidence of a crime, compensation was determined only after criminal proceedings. At this time, defendant Dung Yoon Guillaume asked to be handled privately, but that also meant he admitted the crime. It was extremely disadvantageous for him. Rail wanted to see what kind of antics he was trying to do, so he agreed to that request. When Han Pan-ro heard the news, he went crazy. It was even more infuriating when Kim Jung-chul was publicly stabbed by Rail and left him paralyzed on the bed. Now Rail is suing them for murder. Kim Jung-chul was extremely scared. "I beg Han Pan-ro to send someone to deal with Rail." She could not know that Han Pan-ro intended to attack her. The recorded evidence she collected under a fake identity could not be brought out in court. Rail said, "For a small and weak child, openly taking revenge is an extremely far-fetched thing." The lawyer immediately turned on the switch and nodded in agreement, but Rail still has not found her mother's body, nor has there any way to prove her mother's death. At this time, Yoon Guillaume suggested that he would go with her to get her mother's relics. There may be evidence to prove it, but when Rail arrived, the staff refused. Han Pan-ro stepped forward and blocked the way. Eun Pyong heard the news and immediately ran over. The person in charge said Han Pan-ro was causing great pressure. "But he's just an out-of-meta former president. How can you compare your strength with Eun Pyong? He successfully got the relic back." Moreover, the new person immediately gave it to Rail. When she saw a happy family photo, she tried to hold it back, but tears still flowed. "In my mother's diary, I recorded everything that happened that year. Every day, her mother stood downstairs at Yoon Guillaume's company to protest, but he just looked at her contemptuously, then coldly walked away." Han Pan-ro and Kim Jung-chul saw that she was too troublesome and directly ordered the security guards to chase her away. No one wants to listen to her. Then she discovered that Rail had anorexia and was also self-harming, so she took responsibility for herself. On TV, she saw Yoon Guillaume, because the pressure was too great and caused nerve damage. If someone kills someone, how can they still live in peace like that? People say that the day you see a girl cry and can't do anything is the worst day of your life. Now Yoon Guillaume blames himself. "I didn't expect that Rail's life would be so pathetic." Now even when Yoon Guillaume asked her to forgive him, he didn't dare say a word. Rail used all his strength to grab his collar. Yoon Guillaume volunteered because she did everything. "If you want me to die, then I will die. I thought it was just a casual statement." Tensions continued to escalate as Yoon Guillaume held a press conference and admitted to taking over ZX, as well as the deaths of those involved, stating that an investigation was necessary. Kim Jung-chul was furious and felt trapped, considering Yoon Guillaume to be like a fruit that was difficult to digest. He believed that with money, there should always be an escape route. He immediately called his big brother for help, but even Han Pan-ro was struggling at this point. As a former Meta president, his status was high, but he too was now being summoned by the police for investigation, accused of killing Jang Moon-hee. Rail called Han Pan-ro and revealed that he had sold her out to protect himself, which infuriated Han Pan-ro. She then called her security guard to verify the truth. She learned that her father had abandoned her, becoming the mastermind behind everything, and her security guard, Moon, had betrayed her. When he was captured by Rail and Eun Pyong, he had no choice but to obey them. Moon showed Han Pan-ro photos of the room in the basement and told her that her daughter had given these to the police. Han Pan-ro lost his temper upon hearing this, took out his massive hammer, and attempted to confront Han Sora. Moon pretended to step forward to stop him, but at this moment, Han Sora was also furious and returned home. She shouted at her father, blaming him for everything. Han Pan-ro, seeing his daughter's betrayal, was overwhelmed with anger. He raised his enormous hammer, intending to force Han Sora to meet her mother. Han Sora resisted with all her might, thinking that today was the day she would confront her father. Using all her strength, she tried to escape his grasp, but she couldn't have expected that someone would attack her from behind. Moon, the security guard, had used a golf club to strike Han Pan-ro unconscious. Han Sora, thinking quickly, immediately took him to the room in the basement. Moon advised her to retract her actions quickly, as she wouldn't be able to protect herself if she didn't. However, Han Sora wasn't foolish. If she released Han Pan-ro, she knew she would be the first to lose her life. Suddenly, Han Pan-ro stood up and grabbed her by the neck. Han Sora quickly fled and locked the door to the room. She told him that she wouldn't be beaten like her mother, as she was no longer a child and no longer afraid. The security guard standing nearby was terrified. Han Sora slapped him to bring him back to reality. Han Sora's life took a dramatic turn as she dismissed all the servants in her house, including her security guard, Moon. From then on, she became the true master of her home, taking control of her own life and decisions. Yoon Guillaume's disappearance had been shrouded in mystery since that press conference. In his computer, he found a farewell letter where he had chosen to relinquish everything, transferring all the company shares to Rail, and leaving instructions to pass on his inheritance to his daughter, Dabi. Rail confessed to Eun Pyong that she had told Yoon Guillaume to go and die before. She deeply regretted saying those harsh words. That night, Rail went to the church to find Yoon Guillaume. She called out for him repeatedly, but there was no response. Just as she was about to leave in disappointment, Yoon Guillaume appeared. Rail couldn't hold back her tears and repeatedly apologized. She didn't want to hide her true feelings anymore. Han Sora, upon learning of Rail's situation, quickly acquired a newly looted K-98 rifle. At the same time, Kim Jung-chul arrived to discuss matters with Han Pan-ro. Han Sora lied. telling Kim Jung-chul that Han Pan-ro had fled with a suitcase full of money. She even gave him a golden suitcase and asked him to help capture Rail, even if it meant death for all. Rail was completely unaware of the danger approaching her. While Rail and Yoon Guillaume were enjoying a moment of happiness together, Han Sora set her plan in motion. She was armed with the rifle and a large, sharp knife, ready to strike. It's a reminder never to indulge in love in a closed room, as it's easy for malicious individuals to spot. Kim Jung-chul received the news from Han Sora and used it as a pretext to deceive Yoon Guillaume. Yoon Guillaume warned Rail not to leave the room under any circumstances. However, someone quietly appeared behind her. Kim Jung-chul then attacked Rail, but she instinctively grabbed a nearby trophy and struck him hard in the leg. She quickly snatched the hammer from his hand and, with determination, delivered a powerful blow to his leg, ultimately shattering it. Kim Jung-chul continued to struggle, attempting to grab a nearby lamp to strike Rail's back. Unexpectedly, he was ambushed from behind by Yoon Guillaume, who wielded a large hammer. Yoon Guillaume, fueled by anger and determination, relentlessly attacked Kim Jung-chul to corner him and bring him to justice. In the midst of this chaos, Rail, who had regained her senses, pulled Yoon Guillaume away from Kim Jung-chul. Yoon Guillaume realized the gravity of what he had done, and Rail, despite her own shock, comforted him, telling him that he was a good person. She urged him not to lie or harbor hatred any longer. In the end, Yoon Guillaume took full responsibility for the murder, while Rail hoped that Eun Pyong would be there to support and care for her. Eun Pyong now viewed Yoon Guillaume through a different lens. Is there anything else you would like to know or discuss? Han Sora waited for an entire night but couldn't establish contact with Kim Jung-chul. When she arrived at his location, she found him lifeless. It was clear that he had been betrayed and eliminated. It seemed that everyone had their own agenda, and she had to take matters into her own hands. Afterward, Han Sora returned to her vehicle and applied dark makeup around her eyes, enhancing her sinister appearance. She gazed at her reflection with a wild grin. Soon, she successfully abducted Rail, with Yoon Guillaume following closely behind in pursuit. Yoon Guillaume's words only fueled Han Sora's anger, and she began to drive recklessly. All rationality was lost. Rail eventually regained consciousness and managed to free herself, tearing off the duct tape covering her mouth. She quickly lunged at Han Sora and attempted to strangle her. Han Sora, unable to breathe and with her eyes shut tight, lost control of the car, which crashed into the side of a hill and came to a halt. At this moment, Han Sora grabbed a sharp knife and made a determined, fatal stab into Rail's abdomen. Rail was too weak to resist, and she could only muster a sinister smile as she faded. Han Sora complimented the effectiveness of the knife and expressed her desire to own one. However, Rail taunted Han Sora, claiming she didn't understand love and would never experience it. Yoon Guillaume arrived just in time to intervene, restraining Han Sora, while Eun Pyong rushed to Rail's side. But Han Sora had already lost her sanity and couldn't be stopped. Yoon Guillaume locked the car, preventing anyone from getting out. Despite Han Sora's desperate pleas, Yoon Guillaume remained motionless, stating that some things should come to an end. Fear was evident on Han Sora's face. With a final, determined look towards Rail, Yoon Guillaume hoped that Eun Pyong could provide her with a peaceful life. It was the last thing he could do for the one he loved the most. Yoon Guillaume pressed the brake, hit the gas pedal without hesitation, and drove straight off the cliff. Han Sora was terrified, wondering why he would make her die alongside him, but it was too late. Is there anything else you would like to know or discuss? Rail witnessed the person she loved the most die before her eyes and cried out in agony. She couldn't imagine losing her loved one once again. Yoon Guillaume was gone, and Han Sora was severely injured. Eun Pyong remained by Rail's side, caring for her until she woke up and heard the news of Yoon Guillaume's death, with his remains also incinerated. Rail couldn't contain her grief and burst into tears. Unfortunately, this time, she had no more tears to shed. Han Sora had forgotten her unhappy memories and developed a dissociative identity disorder. She embraced a blanket as if it were her daughter, constantly murmuring to herself. She wore crystal shoes on her feet and believed herself to be a high and mighty princess. Rail couldn't let her off so easily. She handed Han Sora a mirror so she could see her scarred face. Han Sora couldn't accept it. Rail forced her to remember the horrifying events that had transpired, ensuring that she would live in eternal suffering. That was the most significant punishment, as the law of karma spared no one. Is there anything else you would like to know or discuss? Han Sora's bodyguard, Moon, became a witness in court. One by one, his crimes were exposed, and when the police found Han Pan-ro, he had starved to death in the basement room. In this case, the pains were mostly unveiled. Eun Pyong had experienced a difficult life from a young age, growing up without parents, but he had overcome the suffering to reach the peak of his life. However, there was no trace of hatred or anger in him. Rail was quite curious and asked him why he was like that. Eun Pyong explained at length, but Rail remained puzzled and didn't fully understand. In general, he felt that he would make a great civics teacher, and Yoon Guillaume had devoted himself to loving Rail. They had both gone through pain and shared common interests. They had healed each other's heart wounds, making them stronger. Eun Pyung's genuine love, unreciprocated, led him to choose happiness for Rail. Rail wanted to travel abroad, but there were no round-trip flights, and the return date was uncertain. Eun Pyung happily searched for information online, even though he didn't quite understand. He resolutely resigned from his position as a parliamentary member to follow in Rail's footsteps. Meeting her might not be important, but what mattered was that he wouldn't regret or feel remorse. Life is full of hardships, contentment is happiness, and love is beautiful. Being suitable for each other is like two aging moons living out their lives together. The movie ends here. Please take 3 seconds to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye, and we'll see you in our upcoming series.